Picture this. It's London, 1944. A young psychologist walks into a facility for troubled teens. He's about to make a discovery which is going to change psychology forever. And it all started with a group of teenage thieves. Hey everyone, welcome back. In the last video, we did a brief overview of attachment styles. We described what they were. Basically, attachment styles are our blueprints for how we think about relationships, other people, and so on and so forth. And we also did a brief introduction to the four main types of attachment styles. Today, we're going to dive into something even more fascinating, which is the story of how these ideas came to pass. It's a tale that spans continents, challenges everything we thought we knew about human development, and begins with one man's controversial ideas that would eventually revolutionize psychology. And trust me, the story of how we discovered attachment styles is almost as fascinating as the theory itself. Back in the 1940s, most psychologists had a very mechanical view of human relationships. They believed babies only bonded with their mothers because, well, mum equals food. It's pretty simple, right? They called this the secondary drive theory, or we could also call it the cupboard love theory. Basically saying that love was just a happy accident that happened when getting fed. You can think of it sort of like babies learning to love their mothers, the same way you might have a certain attachment or fondness for your favorite coffee shop. You don't really care about the building or the coffee shop itself. It's just the place you keep going back to get your caffeine fix. And over time, that has all these positive connotations in your mind. But some of you are probably thinking, hold on a second of it. I hear what you're saying. There's the behaviorist view, blah, blah, blah. It's all cause and effect. But what about Freud? Wasn't Freud before all of this? Didn't Freud believe all our personality was determined by our relationship with our mother? How does that fit into all this? Good catch, my carefully constructed straw man. But here's the thing. While Freud did talk about the mother-child relationship, he primarily saw it through the lens of basic drives and impulses. He was all about how feeding and toilet training affected personality development. What he missed, and what Bowlby would later discover, was that babies have a fundamental biological need for emotional connection that goes well beyond just getting their physical needs met. And that's where our story begins. Enter John Bowlby, a young psychologist working at a clinic in London. Unlike his colleagues who spent their time theorizing in offices, Bowlby was out there working with real troubled teens. And what he saw changed everything. In 1944, Bowlby did something that seems kind of obvious to us now, but was absolutely revolutionary at the time. He actually looked at these kids' life stories. He studied 44 teenage thieves and compared them to a group of troubled teens who didn't steal. And he noticed something quite fascinating. Half of the teens had experienced something specific in their early childhood. Can you guys guess what that was? What did all these troubled teens, the ones who were stealing, have in common? What they all experienced was prolonged separation from their mothers. But in the comparison group, almost none had experienced this. And here's where it gets really interesting. The most troubled teens, the ones he called affectionless psychopaths, had all experienced serious disruptions in their early relationship. Now, this was really revolutionary stuff for the 1940s. For the very first time, someone was showing a very clear link between our early childhood relationships and later behavioral problems that could develop. Bowlby wasn't just theorizing like everybody else before him had done. He had actual evidence that our early bonds shape who we would later become. But here's what made Bowlby really different. While everybody else was focused on what was happening in the present moment with these troubled teens, he was asking a different question entirely. What happened to these kids when they were babies? It was like he was pulling on a thread that would eventually unravel everything psychology thought it knew about human development. What Bowlby discovered wasn't just about troubled teens anymore. It was about all of us. He started looking at how young children reacted when separated from their mothers. And what he saw was universal: intense distress, crying, searching behaviors, and a desperate need to reconnect. Now, if the previous theories had been correct, if babies only cared about food, then any caregiver should be okay, right? It shouldn't have to be their mother. A well-fed baby should be a happy baby, no matter who's doing the feeding. But that's not what Bowlby was seeing at all. He watched babies who were well-fed and physically cared for. And these babies were in the hospital, so they were still separated from their parents, as was done back then. What he noticed was that despite having all their physical needs met, these kids were feeling apart emotionally. They'd go through predictable stages: protest, despair, and eventually, if the separation lasted long enough, some form of emotional detachment. But here's where Bowlby made his revolutionary leap. What if attachment wasn't a learned behavior at all? What if we were born with an innate need to form close emotional bonds? A need just as fundamental as our need for food or warmth. To prove his wild idea, Bowlby did something that shocked his colleagues. He started looking at monkeys. Yes, monkeys. He was fascinated by Harry Harlow's famous experiments with baby rhesus monkeys who consistently chose a soft, cuddly surrogate mother that provided no food over a wire mother that did provide food. Now, for anyone that doesn't know, a quick overview. This was a study done showing kind of something similar. They had baby monkeys, and they had two what they called mothers. One was just made out of pieces of metal and tubes that provided milk and food, stuff like that. And the other one was soft, it had a blanket. It was something where the baby monkeys could really cuddle up and just feel warm and protected. And what he saw, again, something we wouldn't be surprised by now, but was shocking at the time, was that these baby monkeys preferred staying in the soft, blanketed mother, he called it, rather than the mechanical tubular one. And to Bowlby, this was a smoking gun. It showed that comfort and security were more important than even food when it came to attachment. Bowlby was starting to piece together a completely new understanding of human nature, one that said our need for emotional connection isn't learned, it's hardwired. Bowlby was the one that discovered we humans are, after all, social animals, and we require socialization to be healthy individuals. But to really prove this theory, Bowlby needed more than just the observations he currently had. He needed systematic research, hard data. And this is where our story takes an unexpected turn. Now, if I told you that one of psychology's biggest breakthroughs happened in a small village in Uganda, you might be surprised. After all, we tend to think of most sciences, including psychology, as having originated in, pre-industrial Europe, maybe modern-day America, or something similar. But that's exactly what Mary Ainsworth, a brilliant and meticulous researcher, would transform Bowlby's theories into solid science. In 1954, Ainsworth found herself in Uganda, where her husband took a research position. Instead of seeing this as a career setback, she saw an opportunity. She began visiting mothers and babies in their homes, watching and taking detailed notes about everything. And what she saw was fascinating. Despite the massive cultural differences between Uganda and the West, babies and mothers interacted in a remarkably similar ways. Secure Ugandan babies used their mother as a secure base to explore from. When upset, they sought comfort from their mothers. When calmed, they went back to exploring. But here's where Ainsworth's genius really showed. Instead of just making general observations, she developed a revolutionary method of studying mother-infant interactions. She created a detailed scoring system, tracked specific behaviors, and found patterns nobody had seen before. Think about what this meant. Here was evidence that attachment wasn't just some Western concept. It wasn't about parenting books or cultural practices. These fundamental patterns of human connection show up across continents, across cultures. And Ainsworth wasn't done yet. These observations in Uganda, they were just the beginning. When she returned to North America, she would develop something that would change child psychology forever. What Ainsworth did next was something both brilliantly simple and incredibly powerful. She created what she called the strange situation, a 20-minute procedure that would reveal more about parent-child relationships than anyone thought possible. Picture this. A mum and her 1-year-old enter a room filled with toys. Sounds like every child's dream. They spend a few minutes together, then a stranger comes in. Then mum leaves. Then she comes back. Then she leaves again. Simple, right? But in those 20 minutes, Ainsworth could see patterns that predicted years of a child's emotional development. What made this so revolutionary wasn't just what she was looking at. It was how she looked at it. Instead of making broad generalizations, she tracked tiny details. Did the baby look at the door when mother left? For how long? Did they cry immediately or after a delay? When mum returned, did they run to her, turn away? Was it both? And here's where it gets really interesting. After watching hundreds of these interactions, Ainsworth started seeing clear patterns emerge. She identified 3 distinct styles of attachment: secure, anxious, and avoidance. Each style related to a different kind of parent-child relationship and predicted different outcomes for the child. Now, this wasn't just theory anymore. This was science, hard data. For the first time, researchers could actually measure the quality of emotional bonds. The strange situation became psychology's microscope, letting us see the invisible patterns of human connection. And the academic world, of course, exploded. Researchers everywhere started using the strange situation. Studies poured in from different countries, different cultures, and guess what? These same patterns kept showing up no matter where they looked. But this was just the beginning of the scientific revolution, because now that we could measure attachments, researchers started asking bigger questions. How do these patterns affect us as adults? Can we change? And most importantly, do they pass from one generation to the next? Once researchers could measure attachments, the floodgates completely opened. What started as a study of mothers and babies exploded into something much bigger. Scientists started asking questions: what happens to these attachments when we grow up? In the 1980s, researchers developed something called the adult attachment interview. Instead of watching parent-child interactions, they simply asked adults about their childhood relationships. And here's the mind-blowing part. Just by analyzing how people told their stories, not what happened, but how they spoke about it, they could predict with incredible accuracy what kind of parents they would later become. Think about that for a second. The way you talk about your own childhood today could predict how your own child will behave in the strange situation tomorrow. They call this the intergenerational transmission of attachment, and it was a bombshell discovery. But that wasn't all. As technology advanced, researchers started looking at the brain. They found that different attachment styles actually showed up as different patterns of brain activity. Secure attachment wasn't just a behavior. It was actually visible in the neural circuits that process emotions and stress. That's right, our attachment styles would change the physical aspects of our brain. And then came the genetic studies. Scientists discovered that while attachment patterns can be inherited, it's not through DNA. It's through our relationships. A secure attachment can actually help protect children from genetic vulnerabilities. I'll say that again. A secure attachment can actually help protect children from genetic vulnerabilities. It's like emotional resilience getting passed down through generations. It's fascinating. What started with Bowlby watching troubled teens has grown into a complete science of human connection. We now knew that attachment affects everything. It's how we handle stress, how we form relationships, even how we raise our own kids. But perhaps the most important question was this: how could we use this newfound knowledge to actually help people? The answers would transform hospitals, schools, and therapy rooms around the world. And after all this research wasn't just staying in laboratories and academic journals. It was about to change how we treat children in profound ways. Remember those hospitals Bowlby observed, where children were separated from their parents? Well, that was one of the first things to change. Hospitals started allowing parents to stay overnight with their children. They trained staff to understand the emotional needs of children. What seems obvious to us now, that a sick child needs their parents close by, that came directly from Bowlby and his attachment research. Childcare, that changed too. Instead of focusing just on keeping babies fed, clean, and safe, quality childcare centers started emphasizing emotional bonds. They began using primary caregiver systems, where each baby has a special relationship with one particular teacher. It's a small change, but it had a huge impact. But perhaps the biggest revolution happened in therapy rooms. Attachment theory gave therapists a new lens through which to understand their clients' struggles. Those patterns first seen in 1-year-olds, therapists started seeing them play out in adult relationship, in anxiety, in depression. And this also gave therapists a new tool through which to help people, because they could now model what a secure attachment could look like and help their clients become more secure in their own relationships. New forms of therapy emerged that focus specifically on healing attachment wounds. Instead of just talking about problems, these therapists worked on rebuilding the fundamental capacity to form secure relationships. And they worked. They really worked. And by the 2000s, attachment theory was influencing policymakers too. Countries started extending parental leave, understanding that these early bonds matter. Schools began training teachers in attachment principles. Even businesses started thinking about how attachment styles affect workplace relationships. So there you have it. From teenage thieves to worldwide revolution, the story of how we discovered attachment theory is, in my opinion, pretty incredible. If you watched our last video, you now understand not just what attachment styles are, but how we figured them out in the first place. And here's what I find most amazing. Every time you connect with someone, comfort a child, or work on your own relationships, you're building on these discoveries. What Bowlby and Ainsworth discovered isn't just theory. It's part of our daily life. Speaking of which, if you're watching this and thinking about your own attachment styles or relationships, I've got good news. Our own online therapy agency, Algorithmic Alchemy at algoalchemy.dev, is here to help. Go ahead and visit us. That's once again algoalchemy.dev to book your first session with one of our attachment-informed therapists. And we're just getting started. In our next video, we're diving into why attachment styles matter to us so much and all the different ways in which they affect our daily life. Trust me, you're not going to want to miss it. So guys, be sure to hit that subscribe and ring that bell button so that you don't miss any of our upcoming attachment style videos or anything else related to psychology. Drop a comment below. Personally, I'd love to hear what you found most surprising about the history of attachment theories. And until next time, guys, remember, understanding where these ideas came from helps us understand ourselves just a tiny bit better as well. So, guys, I will see you all in the next one. Take care. Bye-bye.